Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and changemakers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. Going into 2021, the pandemic is now killing more people, shutting down more nonprofits and small businesses, along with wiping out the livelihoods of families, neighborhoods, and communities. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
I could see that we were going to close, and I did hope that they would mandate that because it was feeling very unsafe for my employees. But, I gave them a heads up that I think we should do a layoff so you guys can be first in line. And we closed. It was strange, because I've been doing this business for so long. I've never had to do anything like that. This is something that's been a first time for millions of people for various reasons.
This is the owner of Serendipity, Lisa Sherratt. Over this past year of producing this series, we've been looking for data on the impact on small businesses from the combination of the COVID-19 pandemic and subsequent economic collapse. Here are a few data points we found to provide context to our interview with Lisa Sherratt. Since San Francisco's first shelter-in-place order on March 17th of 2020 to February 9th, 2021, open small businesses have dropped by over 50%, according to new data compiled by the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Between March to July of 2020, the Hamilton Project estimates that 400,000 small businesses nationwide closed their doors permanently. I'm joined remotely by Lisa Sherratt, the owner of Serendipity. I've been going there for years. I love your card and gift collection. Such a great whimsical sense of humor, if you will. Lisa, if you could please share with the audience a little background on you as an entrepreneur, but also really why you created Serendipity.
My history is that I was born in Southern California in the 60s to my hippie parents, one of whom was a student in San Diego. But I was taken back to the UK when I was 18 months old and lived there till 1997 when I decided to use my American passport and immigrate to San Francisco. I've wanted to own a store since I was 14. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. The original vision was that I would be selling my own artwork and maybe offering tea and cake. And I opened my first store in the city with a partner in 2002 after a job layoff and moved to Noe Valley and then sold that in 2009. And opened on Valencia Street, which has always been one of my favorite streets, during the recession. So was able to get in on good rent. There really weren't any stores like mine down there at that time. So that's the background.
And so much of your store is people, walking in person, et cetera. How has COVID-19 impacted the operations of Serendipity?
Yeah, when you close a retail store, obviously the impact is absolute because, as you say, a store needs to be open and a store like mine is there to browse. So, I could see that we were going to close and I did hope that they would mandate that because it was feeling very unsafe for my employees. But, I gave them a heads up that I think we should do a layoff so you guys can be first in line. And we closed. It was strange, because I've been doing this business for so long. I've never had to do anything like that. This is something that's been a first time for millions of people for various reasons. We had been for many months discussing our website, which has always been on a back burner for me because it's really not my business. I'm not massively interested in it, but we had come up with a concept. And just like that first week, Christopher, who was one of my employees, who now works as a contractor, I was like, we just got to get this going. And we're doing these surprise boxes, which means that you can order something online and you don't get to choose exactly what it is. And the idea being that you would send it to someone and they would get a surprise, and we wrap it very nicely. So that was kind of the immediate pivot we had to do. You know, I was 90% down those first couple of months, but that 10% allowed me just to pay any remaining overhead. So it kept me in business until PPP came through. So, you know, I mean, the impacts just cannot even be explained, you know. Looking at all that inventory was pretty painful.
Well, and it also sounds like it was literally just you. You're the only person standing because essentially you don't have to pay yourself. You would love to pay yourself, I'm sure, but it's more important to pay the overhead to keep the space alive. So when you did come back,
about 10% of my store in my living room for quite a few weeks. I was doing all the shipping from home because, of course, I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old at home. My husband doesn't work from home. And then I would do some visits to the store. I actually had some regulars who would do FaceTime appointments with me and things like that. So there was a lot going on. But yes, it was all me.
So you were a mom who was home with remote learning, plus trying to run your store out of your house at the same time. That sounds very hard to do.
Very frustrating, very difficult for everybody. I mean, yes, working parents have, you know, had such a rough time with this. And I mean, trying to work from home with your children is almost impossible. But of course, if you actually have to go out to work, that's very difficult.
So here we are in the summer of 2020, probably you're completely shut down. Then the first money starts to flow through. Did you go in and actually work on applying for a PPP loan?
I have applied for every piece of assistance that I could find. I did receive PPP loan last summer, and then I received PPP loan recently a few weeks ago. Both those pieces have allowed me to have my employees, which means that the store can actually be open because I can't just abandon my kids, you know, all the time. They've definitely become more independent during this. But yes, I mean, without those loans, I mean, I don't know what we would have done. I don't think we would have made it.
I don't think so either. I'm, in fact, trying to figure out how many small businesses will not return in San Francisco, and heard a number as high as 30% of retail won't. So with that said, what other kinds of support would a small business person like yourself, especially on Valencia Street, which is so much about food, beverage, gift shops, clothing shops, it's destination retail, right? Which requires people to show up at your stores. Even though everyone talks about how they can move to e-commerce, it's really hard to do.
I mean, I think the obvious thing is that just encourage people to shop local, to have a focus on that whenever they can. I think there are lots of things that the city can do, but I think small businesses, I mean, we're all unique. So it's like trying to herd cats. An issue for me isn't necessarily an issue for someone else. And so I don't think things that I get very frustrated about for myself aren't necessarily going to impact the whole of Valencia Street. I mean, I think you've seen some great stuff with the parklets. That's been really good for restaurants. Obviously, restaurants have very high overheads, and you can't walk into a restaurant and run it by yourself like I can at my store. So there's always a high expense. And, you know, people are just dealing with what for many months was an unknown thing. I mean, people didn't know enough about COVID to know what was safe and what was reasonable. So how do you manage that as a city? I mean, their backs have been against the wall, you know. So, I mean, I think some of the things that would have helped me was clearer parking, which of course always an issue in the city. It hasn't really been clear what's going on with that. And I mean, normally I cycle, I park out at the zoo because I don't live in the city anymore, and cycle just because there is no parking for a business of an owner. And if I'm in the store with my employees, I can leave every 2 hours to move my car. But when you're working by yourself, you can't do that. So, I mean, these are just little things that, you know, on top of everything else, it's like, I don't really want to deal with that. But I mean, I think the city's done a reasonable job of supporting, and there has been finance out there. There's been lots of grants. But yeah, I mean, I just think you have to kind of start at the bottom by supporting homeless people first so that then business can be supported, because if you don't start there, it doesn't matter anyway. If that makes sense.
Right, because I think it was 8,000 plus people who find themselves unhoused in a lot of Valencia Street, just like Mission Street, just like so many parts of San Francisco. People are living out in the open because they haven't had a choice.
That just never seems right to me in a place that's very rich. It just seems backwards.
So over your many years of owning Serendipity and working there on Valencia Street, what would you consider to be some of your favorite moments?
I was thinking about that as possibly one of the hardest questions because there are just actually so many. I mean, I have, incredible relationships with my customers, many of whom have been my customers for 20 years. I have a fantastic staff who I consider my family, and we just, we have a good time, and sometimes there's sad times and difficult times. And I think one of my favorite recent memories, it's in January 2nd, 2020, we were closed because they were actually doing a seismic retrofit on the building. And it's very difficult for us as a team to get together all at once because we're always open. So I said, you guys should come to my house. I live near the beach in Moss Beach, and we'll have a fabulous brunch. My family are away. And I actually, spent the day with my whole team, and we had some drinks, and some of the team had some joints in the backyard. And then in the evening, we went to the lighthouse here and shared a bottle of wine and watched the sun go down. And I actually have a photo of that. And it just seems like a different century that I could be sitting next to people actually sharing a bottle of wine. And so I think every time the computer boots up and I see that picture, it really gives me hope that we can be doing that again, maybe in another year. So, I mean, my store just has so many good memories. It's just a place I love to be.
Do you feel like it's starting to come back with more people? I mean, when I was in the store a couple of weeks ago, it was great because there at least there was one more person in the store with me, which was wonderful. But do you feel like people are starting to venture back out and feeling comfortable to come into retail stores?
Yes, I see some signs of hope. And what I'm seeing right now is that, there might be 1 or 2 days of business where it's almost normal, like where it's 10 or 15% down. And I mean, that's amazing compared to where it's been. But then there'll be, typically on a rainy day, our business would be softer. But I noticed last week when it rained, it was like 90% down again. Like any barrier is really making it fall. So it's hard to plan for stuff because, I look at numbers and they just don't relate to anything. And I think that, quite a few people have left the city and people will come in and replace them. But a lot of people get off their patterns. And, of course, people are quite rightly still afraid. They don't want to go places that are crowded. But yes, I think that outside dining looks like they're doing a pretty good trade. My weekends, which were the hardest hit business-wise all summer, are now much closer to a normal business. And of course, that's when I make most of my business. So I do think at some point, if we're ahead on the vaccination schedule and our rates stay really good like they are, we will see an uptick, quite an abrupt uptick in business. So I'm not massively worried as long as we can keep going in that direction and the COVID itself doesn't become a different kind of issue.
So for people who are listening to the show, what can they do to support you, support your team in Serendipity?
Just keep shopping when you can and support the other stores too, because we're all together in that. When things close, it isn't good for me. And vice versa, what attracts you to come down there is that you can have a drink and you can eat a meal and that you can buy clothing. And then 99% of my customers are amazing about the rules we've made in the store, but don't come in and try to argue with my employees about wearing a mask and what your opinion is. I know everyone has a different opinion, but we made the rules and those are the rules and we just want to work. We don't want to argue.
Thank you. Nice way to put it. So final question, out of all of what's happened over this last year between the pandemic, between the economic meltdown, you having to lay off all of your friends and coworkers, et cetera, are there any good things that you could see coming out of this?
I think that there's an awareness of who's essential. I think that the disparity that's always there, but not everyone always sees, is really shown. And hopefully more people will, think about equity when they make decisions on things. And I think just the reminder for me of how great my vendors are and how great my customers are and how people have really, really gone out of their way to try and support us has been incredibly touching. People definitely didn't need to do the things they did, and they have worked very hard to try and keep me going in many different ways. And that doesn't just help with business, but it helps with the emotion a great deal. So I think that's the biggest thing. And just my staff, many of whom are back, although not massively comfortable about working as much as before, not as busy, so it's not needed. But my staff who stuck there when they didn't need to and stayed in touch and offered to help without pay. I mean, all of those things are a massive thing that obviously mean a great deal to me.
Thank you. So is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention, or anything else about small businesses?
Small businesses, obviously the lifeblood of a town like San Francisco. We give so much in taxes and so much to schools and so much in donations. Because it's maybe not that much money as an individual, it's not recognized, but it's a huge thing. And San Francisco wouldn't be the same without all of those places.
Nicely stated. I mean, I think small businesses is really the lifeblood of every little neighborhood that everyone just assumes that will always be there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing Serendipity's card and gift offerings and how you are trying to survive the pandemic. We'll make sure that the listeners have your contact information, website, especially now that you're doing those fantastic gift boxes, and they can follow Serendipity and get engaged and support your wonderful store. Please stay safe and healthy out there. That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voice of Lisa Sherratt, the owner of Serendipity, a specialty gift and card store on Valencia Street in San Francisco. To find out more about Serendipity and order one of their surprise gift boxes, go to serendipitysanfrancisco.com. To find out more about other wonderful small businesses, please listen to episode 20 with JT and Shannon of Blue Plate, and episode 22 with Michelle of Nana Joe's Granola, Andrea and Pooja about Bayview Bistro in episode 23, Rome and his Italian soul food mashup in episode 24, Brad, Haley, and Jay from Firefly Restaurant in episode 32, along with Mark and Martha from Hayes Valley Bakeworks in episode 36, Barbara of Grotter Winery in episode 38, and multiple restaurant owner Kristen of All Good Pizza in episode 41, as well as Lori, who is both the multi-restaurant owner and executive director of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association in episode 11 about the state of our restaurant sector. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.